Hi, and welcome to another episode in SEO is AEO, the epic webinar series about answer engine optimization. I'm Jason Barnard, and today we're going to be talking about the knowledge graph. How well is Google doing in understanding the world? We've got three amazing experts, Bill, Kristine, and Paul. Kristine is currently connecting, so she'll be up and live. There, she's up and live now, which is wonderful to see. Hello, Kristine. I'm going to start by introducing everybody. Bill, you have an agency, if I understand correctly.
Yes, that's right.
But I'm not very interested in that. I'm more interested in the fact that you're a musician. And I heard some of your freewheeling jazz electric guitar. Brilliant stuff.
No, you're a stalker.
Yep.
How
long have you been playing music? I know the answer to this question.
You do? Yeah. Well, you're a good stalker then. Yep. Since I was 14, I'm 43 now. So music is sort of, everything to me. It was the start of all of this for me.
All right. So, how did it move you into SEO?
The long story short, I did the whole rock star thing. We were trying. It was at the time of Napster and all sorts of cool stuff going on. But I was already working on website design and SEO on the side, and you got to get your band found, and SEO is just sort of this cool thing. And I said, damn, this is pretty cool, this stuff. So once I got tired of the music stuff, I just stayed with this, and sort of it opened a lot of doors. Networking is a big part of what you need to do in any business, but that really brought me into the world that I'm in now in a weird way.
It actually corresponds quite a lot to my story, which is similar. I'm a musician from way back as well, with the double bass here. And I think quite a lot of musicians made that segue, if I can use a musical term, including the guy who created Netscape, whose name escapes me. He was a musician before, and I met him years and years ago when he was a big name in the beginning of the 2000s. So that's apparently lots of musicians then become SEOs or come into the web world. And the only difference I can see between you and me, other than the fact you live in America, is that you look like Zach
Galifianakis. That's right. People come to me all the time and say that, and I tell them I'm him, and they buy me drinks, and it works really, really well.
Oh, cool. Ooh, I'll have to find somebody I can do that with. Great stuff. So move on to Paul. Now, I've learned something about you that I haven't told you yet, is that we both went to the same university. You turned up the year after I left. What did you study? John Moores University.
Well, I did kind of economics for a little bit, and
so did I.
Sociology and all that kind of business. Yeah, it wasn't a bad place, was it, Liverpool, back in the day?
Yeah, it was great. Yes. I seem to understand that you spent too much time drinking, and so did I, and I can relate to that.
Yes, there were rumours. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Now, do you know who else went to John Moores University?
Go on.
John Lennon.
Really?
Yep.
Well, there you go.
His art school then became part of John Moores University. So if you search alumni of John Moores University, you get John Lennon and me next to each other, which is brilliant.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's obviously related. There's an example of the knowledge graph being slightly screwy. Yeah.
I thought it was an example of the knowledge graph getting it right.
There you go.
You have a special talent for writing about sheet steel.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was a special talent, but it's something I've done, yes, back in the day. And that's how I originally got into all of this kind of business, doing content and obviously creating blogs and websites for small businesses. Then obviously you progress as it goes on over the years. The next thing you know, I'm talking to you. Yeah. And
for your sheet metal blog, you won, hang on, what was it called? Blogging's Best Small Business Blog Award.
Yes. As accolades go, it's up there. It really is. Yeah.
It is. I was terribly impressed.
Thank you. So was my mother. Yeah.
Now, Kristine, lovely to see you again. We've done a webinar or two before and met. How are you?
I'm good. It's just early.
Yeah, I think you're 6 a.m. The other two are 9 a.m. and I'm 3 p.m. in Europe. What I see is you talk absolutely everywhere in the world, and you write for every SEO major SEO site. Is that right?
Maybe. No, I write a few. Yes.
And you do concierge SEO digital marketing. Concierge being accompanying. I like that term. That's really nice.
Yes, I position myself more between the person who's just like a freelancer and an agency.
Yeah, that's brilliant. The other things I found out about you is you've got a doctorate in sociology or a PhD in sociology.
Well, it means all but dissertation. So I did all the hard work, just haven't quite finished yet.
Oh, all right. And the only other thing is that you train Chinese province officials in China.
I did on accessibility back about 8 years ago.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so yeah.
Did you enjoy
it was
China?
Fun.
Yeah.
I did. We had a good time. We went to a place most people haven't heard of, even people I know who are from China, which is Bahai. Mm-hmm. It was an interesting little town, about 3 or 4 hours from Beijing by plane.
Cool. I think that's an amazing thing. I would love to go to China to teach, perhaps not accessibility because I don't know enough about it, but something. So if any Chinese government officials are watching, they want to invite me to teach SEO or the knowledge graph or schema markup, I'm happy to come. So we're going to start the webinar with that personal pitch for a job in China. Anybody who's been watching the series, they'll have seen this so many times. Relevancy, understanding, and credibility. That's how the path or the journey from question to answer goes in answer engine optimization, according to me. And today, because we're looking at the knowledge graph, we're looking at Google's understanding. And I like to be very clear that Google's understanding requires communication on our part. We have this great opportunity to communicate who we are, what we do, and what our products, what our offers are, what solutions we can provide to Google's users. And the knowledge graph is a really great way of going about that. Now, I found this guy, Luciano Del Corro, who liked the term, who made the term an encyclopedia for machines. It's a bit simplified, a bit simplistic, but it's a really nice way of presenting to people who don't really know what a knowledge graph is. And he talks about the idea that it's an encyclopedia that a machine can delve into and understand without any human help. We then go on to Fluffy McCoy, whose name I adore, Jo Stitchbury, her real name. She found this quote: knowledge graphs are large networks of entities, their semantic types, properties, and relationships between those entities. I think that's incredibly clear if you're on the step above the encyclopedia for machine. And then she also said, and this is the incredibly interesting part, the continuous flow of large amounts of data from diverse heterogeneous sources, the ontology semantics of the data can be extended and revised algorithmically, as new data arise. That is brilliant. And especially with the topic layer just being announced, that last little part takes on an extra special meaning that I think we're going to dig into over the next 3 episodes. Lastly, we're looking at knowledge graphs allow for the application of various graph computing techniques and algorithms which added additional intelligence over the stored data, for example, allowing implicit information to be derived from explicitly asserted data. And I love that last little bit because it's this idea of taking information we have and extrapolating new information from it, which, although isn't happening now, as far as I'm aware, it's certainly something that's going to start happening. That if you can link enough entities together with specific attributes, you can then guess an attribute of another linked entity. Theoretically, that will come. That's my personal point of view. So having moved us a long way into the future, we're now going to go back to the past with Bill. Give us your thoughts on how well Google has done in growing an accurate knowledge graph since 2012, and I had to add, and how big is it?
Yeah, I laugh every time I see that. That's like my Match.com profile picture, but it cracks me up when I see it. So I had to give you that one. Sorry about that. So how big is the knowledge graph? I think the last I heard, which was a couple of years ago, like 570 entities and over like 20 billion facts. So the knowledge graph, obviously it's grown a heck of a lot since then. I don't know where it's at right now. What I think is really compelling is, how accurate is it? How well is it done? And I actually have maybe a semi-unpopular opinion on it. So I think it's really impressive. When it came out, I was like, wow, this is huge. This is great. Google's moving into a semantic search model. Google's doing everything the way that the framework is was designed to do. We got the triple stores, we got all the things, the relationships, the concepts, everything working together. What I get frustrated about is when I actually see it implemented. And sometimes I think the accuracy is a little bit off. So, that Google's looking at sources, everything from schema to maps to, Google Plus to a bunch of their properties, Wikipedia, DBpedia, right, which is really just Wikidata. That could be wrong a lot. Wikipedia can be wrong a hell of a lot. So I've seen a case where we have a really large client, well-known company. The information about them is out there. It can be validated all over the web, but the knowledge graph had their CEO wrong for a long time. We were talking earlier about something you saw on one of my blogs, so I'll go into this about an example of things that are wrong. So I actually have become a search entity, right? I used Freebase way back in the day. Freebase was a Google-owned database property. It was essentially you put in, we weren't calling them search entities at the time, but you put in these objects, these entities, and you map them together with Freebase. And that's actually what I did. I was able to go in and put my name in, put my family's name in, probably put more information in than I should have. This information got ported over to Google, and then one day I was a search entity. So you can take your phone and you can ask Google, you can say, what does Bill Sebald do for a living? And it'll respond back. It'll say, Bill Sebald is a CO professional, a CO, not a SEO, a CO, which is different. But if you actually Google it on your desktop, you'll see that same knowledge card, but on the right, it's going to say something different. So there's conflicting information right there in the search results. It's going to say I'm a musician. And as we were talking before this started, I used to be a musician, so it's got some facts right, but it started listing a whole bunch of songs that weren't mine because they were terrible songs and I only write good songs. So the same thing happened with the knowledge card for my company, Greenlane. It says that Greenlane was started in Philadelphia. Well, the truth is it was started in a city next door called Reading. So they now offer in the knowledge in the cards, a way to go in and update the information or say, hey, I think it's wrong. Here's what it should be. So I submitted to them, to Google. I said, hey, this information's wrong. They wrote back, said, no, it's right. It matches what we believe based on everything that we're finding online. I said, but I'm the source. Like, I'm the guy who started the company. I can tell you it's wrong. It's just, they didn't take it. I think that's a problem. And I think, it's not doing as good a job as I had hoped it would have done in terms of content extraction that isn't marked up, So a quick example there that I can think of, if you type or ask what instrument does Bill Clinton play, you're going to get a knowledge result for saxophone. Even though I'm a search entity, if you say what instrument does Bill Sebald play, it's out there, but it doesn't know how to respond. So I'd like to see Google do a better job in taking all the information that it has, because I do believe it knows a hell of a lot more than what it's actually implementing, what it's actually saying. I think it knows more. I think it can extract more. I want to see it get used a little bit more and be a little bit more accurate. I think maybe Google's struggling to figure out how to get more information in and have more trust with it.
Yeah, I think the word trust is incredibly important. And Google's being scaredy pussyfoot, and it won't put the information out there if it isn't incredibly sure of it. And then you look at something like Diffbot. We were talking about that last week. We'll talk about it later on. They're going out there and they're throwing the data out there. They're extracting it from the unstructured web. I get the feeling Microsoft are a bit more adventurous. Google are being very reticent. I think you're right. They've got more information than they're letting on. And a lot of it is inaccurate, and I think they're struggling with that. I would tend to agree. But in conclusion, basically, you were incredibly enthusiastic in 2014. You're less enthusiastic now.
Less enthusiastic. I think I'm waiting for something to really, impress me, right? Because you're seeing different modules pop up. You're seeing different cards pop up, and that's great. That's really cool. But I just feel like, Google created this second brain so that, they were always known for serving web pages full of data. That's what they did since the start. Now they're able to serve, the information specifically. I'm just waiting for a little bit more to come from that other brain, I think.
Brilliant.
So maybe I am
Bill's
less enthusiastic.
Yeah, Bill's disappointed in Google.
I'm one of those glass half empty guys.
Okay, great. The number of knowledge graph opportunities available to brands is humongous, and I've written that nice and big so that it's incredibly obvious what I'm trying to say. But it goes well beyond my business concept of just corporation-based in town represents websites, and I think kind of this is something that Bill was saying is that for the minute that's all we're getting from the knowledge graph, but there's loads more behind that. Paul was talking about the bigger the brand, the more there is to optimize. Can you give us the lowdown on that? I thought that was a really nice statement. You're the expert.
Exactly. And it kind of follows on from what Bill was saying. And it's more a case of the bigger the brand, the more entities there are, the more topics there are, the more stuff there is to get right, the more stuff there is to get wrong. And that's obviously, you see some, businesses that operate across various industries, various verticals, and in some instances, when you're a global brand, also languages. Particular case studies and clients that I've worked with in the past, university medical centers, especially over here, one that underwent a rebrand. And I mean, talk about messing up a knowledge graph when you're completely changing domains and completely changing names and things along those lines. And thinking about what are the topical entities for a brand in particular, rather than just the vertical. And when you think about medical centers, hospitals and things like that, you're talking about the doctors, you're talking about the departments. And when you start looking at doctors, they want to also own their own knowledge graph. So there's, these competing areas of who owns these entities and their own brands. And then once we started looking a little bit more after the decentralized and siloed medical centers, we started looking at the university as a whole. And over here, universities are obviously slightly different operations than they are in the UK. Sports is a lot bigger driver of finance and money and whatnot than it is over in the UK. So you expand this knowledge graph and various entities, and you start seeing that, we have football as an entity, which is an even bigger, stronger brand point than, say, the university itself. And all of a sudden you start seeing, from a university perspective, you've got to do the football, which obviously has an element of seasonality, and you're looking at things like rosters, video, news, schedules and fixtures. And then the university, which I think the knowledge graph has improved a lot in relation to universities in particular. So you can put in state costs, the rate of graduation, notable alumni, rankings, and even test scores. But then the weird thing is, once you start looking at the overarching brand, and when you don't put the actual modifiers in, like university of football, you start getting more mixed results. And it's a case of, again, when can you push for certain elements to appear in the knowledge graph versus other? And that always seems a little bit haphazard. It always seems like Google's guessing a little bit, dependent on, what's important at the time. So it's really a case of, brands being able to understand what their own particular knowledge graph is, because it can be slightly different within verticals, and custom in that regard.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. So, I mean, they've got the vertical, they've got the things that's understood about the company. You've got to get your company understood first, the brand understood first, then all the parts about it. And I like the idea as well, and we'll be talking about this next week, about using doctors' names to leverage a university and a university to leverage the doctors. In fact, there's a lot of barnacling that can go on there.
Exactly.
To get yourself in the knowledge graph, but also to improve the understanding. I mean, I use the knowledge graph API and ping it quite a lot and do some tracking of brands and watch the relevancy score when you type a unique name or non-unique name. And what I've seen is that I'm working on my own name in the way that Bill was describing that he worked on his earlier on, and in fact, using the musician side of things like Bill was doing. And I stopped working on it about a year ago, and the relevancy score that it throws back has gone down. Now, I don't know whether that is because it's less sure about the information than it was before because I've stopped feeding it, or whether other Jason Barnards have become relatively better known. Yeah. And relatively speaking, the relevancy isn't quite as obvious anymore. So that's a question. If anyone has an answer to that out there, including you, Paul, please do give me the answer. But that idea of relevancy falling, is it a question of losing understanding, losing confidence, or just that other entities have come more to the fore and my relative relevancy has gone down? Don't know why I was talking about that, but it was something I wanted to get in here today. Thank you very much, Paul. That was absolutely brilliant. Now we're moving back to Bill again. Kristine's getting a bit of time off. Question, how can understanding the knowledge graph help improve rankings?
There's that picture again. So
I apologize.
I gave it to you, I think. So yeah, I might have not been that enthusiastic about some of the ways that Google's implementing into the SERPs, but the statement about, I think Google has a lot more information than we know, I think that's very true. And one of the things that I find that's working really well is, if you want to rank better, you got to do everything you do with traditional SEO, the standard blocking and tackling that we've all been raised on. But Google wants to get away from just ranking things based on keywords, right? Because everybody, SEO is almost a household name now. Everybody's doing the same work. They need to be able to understand content a little bit better, right? They want to understand intent better. These are all the things that were promised to us when this came out. So one of the things you have to think about is you have to think about these entities. You have to think about the knowledge graph. You have to think about the information that it knows in this second head, the second brain. So when you're optimizing something, let's say you're writing an article on like the Philadelphia Eagles, right? So in the knowledge graph, you could look at the knowledge card and then you get a little bit of information on what they know, right? So they already know that Doug Peterson is the coach of the Eagles. They know that the Philadelphia Eagles are an NFL team. So with the way that this relationship-driven database works, they're now able to infer that, okay, Doug Peterson is an NFL coach. So they're able to sort of figure things out. That's the whole magic about semantic search. So when you're writing something about the Eagles, I think it's a great idea to take some of the entities that you think Google knows and pepper them in as long as it makes sense, right? Don't spam them in like we're doing keyword stuffing, but think about if I'm writing about the Eagles, these are some things that I need to mention to give a little bit more assurance to Google that I know what I'm talking about and that I'm talking about the Philadelphia Eagles and not just, a bird. You know what I mean? So there are actually a few tools out there that are helping to do this, but you could essentially take a look at the SERPs that you want to rank for, look at the intent, make sure that you have a piece of content that fits the intent, and then go through the listings that are doing well and look for the entities, right? There's tools, Google Cloud Natural Language can go through and pull the entities out. Alchemy API can do it. There's several that can do it. And you can take a look at those entities and say, okay, how can I work them in? So when you're writing with those entities in mind, I'm seeing, and many SEOs are seeing a very good increase in visibility and ranking visibility when you're starting to bring in those other entities. And it works really well.
Okay, yeah. I mean, we're gonna diss Google a bit more here, and I use their NLP cloud, and I've been pretty disappointed with it in the same way, perhaps, that you're disappointed with the cloud, with the knowledge graph. Sorry. So I'm going to start looking into Diffbot and WordLift because apparently they've got something going on that's really interesting. I just signed up for Diffbot, and I'll be looking at that tomorrow morning. Now we're going to move on to Kristine. I saw this from Ivan Berkovich, excuse me. It's a bit of a long text, but Google Maps is a great example of what the future of search should look like. Augmented public data powered by a knowledge graph. Google has thousands of employees on staff constantly correcting errors, machine learning clusters interpreting addresses, cars driving through streets to get ground level data, satellites taking photos, and millions of phones constantly sending updates. With this infrastructure, Google is able to maintain a real-time representation of the world and answer geospatial queries that have never been asked. I thought that was brilliant. Question is, what does Kristine think? Is that an inspiring quotation, or is it a dead duck?
I'm not really sure, actually. So I'm not sure the question on that one there. So
sorry, it was something that I read, and I didn't really think it through that much. I just thought, oh, that sounds really cool. We've got. I'll go back to that slide again because maybe the text was a little bit fast. What I understand from this is that Google Maps is basically a knowledge graph that is functioning, and it's functioning incredibly well, in the sense that if we type into Google Maps now, I want to go from A to B, it can tell us how to get there, even if it's never done that trip before, for example. Or I want to just take a coffee, where's a restaurant where I can just have a coffee? It's got the attributes of the cafe near me where it can say you can just have a coffee there, or a disabled toilet, or whatever it is. So we end up with these entities, which are businesses, towns, roads, with attributes, with tolls, without tolls for the roads, can just have a coffee, disabled toilets, etc., etc. And the phone's sending on all this data constantly. I mean, the quantity of data that Android must be sending to Google is phenomenal. And it's dealing with all this at the same time. It can do real-time traffic because it's dealing with this data in real time. And it can tell me how to get from A to B. And I had a very interesting, well, not very interesting really, but slightly interesting experience, because I was using Google Maps to go around Luton to try and find my hotel for a night before an airport. And Luton's got the world's worst one-way system, and Google got it wrong. Google had all the one-way streets wrong. And I ended up getting incredibly annoyed with it. I'm so used to Google Maps getting it right, and getting it right first time, getting it right off the bat. And then I sat down and thought, actually, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have had to ask people in the street, and they would have been going, ooh, I don't know, maybe over there, and it would have been terrible. So I've come to rely on what I see now as an active operational knowledge graph. Would you agree with that, was the question? Or am I getting excited about absolutely nothing?
No, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of, that kind of knowledge graph is probably a lot easier than language, because we do know where the coffee shop is and where the directions are and what the streets are. We don't necessarily know if they're one way or not, so that's something that Google obviously missed in your quest. But I think that is probably a good representation of something that all the points are fairly well known or easy to interpret. Because the knowledge graph itself is because Google can't do natural language processing, right? So when you come to language, that's much more difficult than it is to do in sort of like the map result, where there's a lot of data that's already known and doesn't need to be interpreted. Whereas it's not quite the same with language because of the, variants and synonyms and context and many languages and things like that. So I think that's a good representational point.
Super. That's brilliant. In fact, so what you're saying is this is actually just a really simple example, and I'm getting terribly over-enthusiastic about something that isn't actually that difficult to do, and so Bill can still be disappointed.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to add something?
No, I was just saying because there is that misunderstanding, I think, a lot of times that Google does natural language processing in the search results, and it can't. So that's why we have the knowledge graph, right? We need an interpreter. Google needs something to tell it what the relationships are, has the patent for related entities, so that also tells us what's related to that entity. They also use search data to decide what's a popular interpretation of that entity. And then language is so complex. So I think maps are probably a much simpler way for Google to apply that graph.
Yeah, brilliant. I thank you. You've brought me down to earth. I think that's a really, really, really nice comment. I'm very happy with that. Moving on, and in fact, it's not just Google. Obviously, we all know that we have Amazon who have their knowledge graph. Luna Dong, who moved from Google to Amazon and is now building Amazon's product graph. They also have Graphic. We have Facebook, who are obviously very big on graphs. Microsoft, who Martha van Berkel last week was saying she's betting her bottom dollar on, maybe not her bottom dollar, but one of her dollars on Microsoft coming back very, very strong with their knowledge graph. Apparently they've integrated it into their 360 suite or whatever it's called. She's a bit keen on that. And Diffbot, which I discovered a couple of weeks ago with apparently 10 billion entities and 1 trillion facts. So once again, they're really, really going for it. But I like this next slide. The web as a database, the biggest knowledge graph ever. What they're saying is so far, when we have this database, it's just we can't make sense of it with the machines we've got. And their idea is, the illustration is to put it all in, put it through Diffbot and create a knowledge graph automatically. Apparently, they don't really use schema markup. They just try and use the unstructured data within the web pages. So hopefully by next week, I would have had a look at that and I'll be able to say something more. Does anybody here know Diffbot? I'll take that as no. Great.
No. I only know that they boast that they're bigger than Google.
Okay, yeah. Well, they say they've got more data. So I mean, I definitely think it's something to look into. It might turn out to be a wet fish or a dead duck or whatever you want to call it. Right, the big question, basically all of that was just say Google shouts really loud. I mean, it goes on and on about it. And somebody, I think it was Aaron Bradley said it was a marketing ploy by Google to go on about the knowledge graph, and that it isn't particularly that good, but they're making a big marketing deal out of it. So are they the best? What about Microsoft, Diffbot, Amazon? Sorry, I've forgotten to put the photo on there, so that must be Bill.
You know, the thing about, are you the best? You could be the best. You could have the best technology. You could have the most information. But, it's all about how this is going to get used. Google, I think, has the advantage. They got the platform to use their knowledge graph. So I don't know who really is the best. I'm most familiar with the way that Google does it because of the job that I have, the industry that I'm in. Yeah, so I can't go too far, but I think it's really important. You can't brag about how great you are if people aren't using it, if it's not coming into play.
Great stuff. Paul, do you have an opinion on that?
Not particularly. I think it's going to be a case whereby, as we've seen, software break down, we're going to see them break down differently, how they're going to be using the knowledge graph. We're seeing it a little bit in terms of how they're approaching healthcare, which I'll talk about a little bit, in a minute. Some people are going to be more, work more around hardware versus software versus, and how they want to work within companies versus make it more open graph, and I think that'll be interesting.
Super. Paul, by the way, we've lost your image. You've frozen. Maybe you could unconnect and reconnect your camera. Kristine, do you have a particular opinion? I mean, we've had Martha who said she's gunning for Microsoft. I quite like Amazon, just because I like Luna Dong and her approach. Are you particularly keen on any of the other ones?
You mean on the different knowledge graphs?
Yeah.
No, not particularly.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, yeah, just meaning that like everyone has their different ways of doing it right now. The holy grail is natural language processing, right? And
sure.
Whoever gets there first will win the race. So
there you go. I was about to say exactly that. Your bet is whoever gets there first will win the race. Okay,
exactly.
That's a really nice comment. The next one's for you. Knowledge-based trust versus PageRank. This is once again, I've said her name twice. I'm going to say it a third time. Luna Dong, who's created this idea of knowledge-based trust and suggests that PageRank cannot be used in any way, or cannot be used, to judge knowledge-based trust. She used the example of gossip sites. If you have a gossip site, it will tend to have a very high PageRank, but you cannot trust the information it's giving you. So back to Kristine again. Knowledge-based trust. PageRank has no role in a knowledge graph-driven world. Can we forget about PageRank?
Oh, I don't think they'll ever forget about PageRank. But I think I'm not sure that the way that the paper that I read that was written that the trust could somehow replace links in PageRank and that kind of graph for helping to define knowledge-based entities. Because I'm sorry, it's hard to put it into words.
Yeah.
But let's just PageRank's been there since day one, and I don't think it's going anywhere. And they may use something like knowledge-based trust for facts to make sure they get it right, but I don't think it's something that would replace PageRank in the long. But
I mean, Amazon, for example, in filling their knowledge graph, they're going to have to find some way to have knowledge-based trust because they don't have PageRank to rely on. True,
very true. So when we say the knowledge graph, we often think of only Google as knowledge graph, but you're right. Yeah. Like knowledge graph was way before Google. They existed before Google said the knowledge graph, which is a marketing term versus the fact that knowledge graphs have existed for a very, very long time.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, but when it comes down to it, PageRank's important to Google's knowledge graph, presumably, but for other knowledge graphs, they don't have that PageRank, so they have to find other ways, and they're going to need to find a way to have knowledge-based trust. And Amazon, from what I understand, are doing a lot of work on that. Okay, money. This is for Paul, who brought this topic up. Ultimately, how are they going to make money out of it? Whoever it might be.
It's a very good point. I mean, I think we've got probably the basic stuff that we're seeing a little bit now. Things like arbitrage, where certain SERPs that aren't necessarily driving any kind of revenue, Google can push users to SERPs that obviously have more paid results, and that's one way for them to be able to like piggyback. Then there's probably like the old school Naver model, where they can start pushing in certain things in certain parts of the knowledge graph, maybe things around events, appointments, and things like that. But I think probably what they're obviously gunning for is huge disruption, and where is it that they're really throwing all the money at, and where is this really going? And I think it's probably, the first one that we'll see a huge disruption within is the medical knowledge graph. We've seen them with Mayo Clinic take over symptoms, and everybody knows that that's not monetizable as it stands today because it's so far up the funnel. But nearly every single healthcare operation has said we no longer touch, as a content play, symptoms, because Google's got all that kind of wrapped up. You can do a little bit of barnacling, but that's about it, and so it's a case of looking at what are the big four all playing at? You've got like Apple, who've got health records on phones, and they're starting to do life alerts and things along those lines. Google Duplex is an interesting play, in terms of appointments. You've got Microsoft Healthcare Division that got opened up this time last year, and then you've also got the Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan Chase looking at insurance. And these are all massive disruption plays. And if they all start playing at the same time, it could get quite ridiculous. I mean, Google's back since about 2009, 60 or so different ventures, things like Doctor on Demand. So we're talking telemedicine. We're talking Flatiron in terms of oncology, 23andMe, the genetics, and all the data that they're starting to amass behind the scenes. And the report, VentureBeat had a good article about how AI and Google, obviously Google Image Pro AI has looked at identifying metastatic breast cancer, and they found that they can find in some cases a 99% success rate when using image AI over and above human pathologists who have a 62% failure rate. So once you start looking at this, and you can start seeing a scenario, for example, not too far away, where people can start saying, well, I've got this mole. They can take a picture of it on Google Lens, send it to a telemedicine doctor. They can then look at it in terms of like the image knowledge graph. Duplex can then sort out an appointment with their existing doctor or whatever, and then your insurance and prescription drugs from Amazon, Google, or whatever. And that seems that it would work extremely nicely, all told. And I can see that that's going to happen sooner rather than later.
Okay, brilliant. So that's a bit of a step up from my Google Maps example. And there's actually money making at the end in that they can push people through to purchasing, whether it's Google or... Yeah, brilliant stuff. So the monetizing of the knowledge graph is being able to catch people in the funnel at some point along the funnel and then push them through to purchasing.
Yeah,
is what I've understood.
Yes.
Super, great. And just, sorry, one quick question on that. Is it that you know a lot about the medical part of the knowledge graph, or is it that that's a very important part of the knowledge graph, or something that's been very well developed?
I think it's a little bit of both. Having worked in the healthcare space and having seen, to Bill's point earlier, just having seen how the healthcare knowledge graph hasn't worked as well as it should do. And I think it's an extremely important part of, especially in the US. So it's something that I've always been quite interested in. And the data's there. That's the difference. The data is leaps ahead, yards ahead of anywhere else.
So that's the space to watch to see.
I think it is, yes. If I was to work anywhere in relation to SEO for the next 10 or 15 years or so, it would very much be within the healthcare space.
Okay. So I can look at healthcare and just copy what they're doing. Great.
Pretty much.
Here's my little conclusion about the different knowledge graphs. Google wants to understand the whole world. Diffbot have great claims and appear to feed some big players. I mean, they've got eBay on there, Yandex, and DuckDuckGo, I think it was. Amazon are arguably concentrating things that are more towards a path to purchase, but they're keeping pretty quiet about what they're doing. Microsoft are possibly very strong, but they're keeping pretty quiet. Apple have a walled garden, and they're still keeping pretty quiet, but they've got all their data locked in through the iOS. IBM won Jeopardy in 2011, and they haven't done very much since. How do you see the future? Basically, I'm saying that this is where we're at. This is my opinion where we are. Obviously, you don't have to agree, but where's the future going to go other than the monetizing? Kristine?
Gosh, a big question, right?
It is a big question. Do you want me to move to Bill while you think about it?
Did you pass it to me? I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bill, and we'll come back to Kristine.
All right.
She's frozen.
Oh, I got it. All right. I honestly think what I was saying before, what I'm sad that I haven't seen yet, will probably come to fruition, right? So I think the things I was shitting on were actually going to be things that at some point are going to be rolled in a little bit, a little bit better. They're going to be implemented a little bit better, so that the real value of what a full healthy knowledge graph can do will be finally obtained by Google users.
Great stuff. Okay. Just a quick reminder to the audience, if you want to ask your questions, please do type them into the group chat in the chat window. I've completely forgotten to suggest that. We're moving on towards the end of this episode. So more questions we have, more opportunities we'll have to hear these great people speak. Paul is now going to tell us how he sees the future.
I think, as I've just pointed out, I think we'll start to see, I think we'll see specific specific knowledge graphs within specific industries. Obviously, the knowledge graph primarily being one. And I think we'll start seeing different use cases. For example, IBM probably are going to be the ones who do the computing power. They're probably the ones who may have, quantum computing screwed down, and they're going to do quite a lot of the processing, And I think it'll be very, very interesting to see how all this unfolds and how quickly it unfolds, because I have seen within 2 years how the example that I was talking with in relation to the university, how that was a lot more muddled 2 years ago. And now it's a lot more definitive for, branded searches with modifiers for particular topics. They're getting it right more often than they are getting it wrong, and I think that's encouraging. They still screw it up quite badly when they want to, and it can still be spammed, but it's getting better, I think.
Cool, great stuff. And Kristine, back to you now.
I think if we're looking like in the short term, it's pretty much been, I think, covered what's going to go on. I think in the long term, it's a step in the path towards natural language processing, and to take all these entities and machine learning and human interaction with correcting what they've got wrong and feeding itself to eventually try to get away from having to need the interpreter. Even Gary has said they'd like to get away from schema in about 5 years. So I think that's the direction that they're using. This is sort of like the step along the path to the child learning language. Yeah. And and so their algorithms and everything at this point are in their infancy, maybe like a 1 or 2 year old child, and they're shooting for full-blown language skills within the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, brilliant. I really like the world child and education, that idea of looking at knowledge graphs, saying, okay, we've got a child opposite us and we need to educate it. And for a child to learn, it needs to have not too much information all at once. It needs simple information that it can understand, and it needs that information confirmed and reconfirmed by trusted sources, be it parents, teachers, or other trusted people, grandparents, whatever, sisters, brothers. And the knowledge graph, I mean, I did a presentation where I presented the knowledge graph as though it was my daughter, with this idea of educating and communicating. And I know that Kim, who we had on a few weeks ago, talks a lot about education. Lovely stuff. In fact, William Rock's just asked, what do you guys see with position zero, voice search and the knowledge graph? And in fact, that was the next question. We've been looking throughout this series at the position zero profile. I'll let you all read that a little bit if it's not too small for you. I'm interested to know how the knowledge graph can or affect or is important in position zero, where position zero isn't just the feature snippet at the top. It's everything we find, like Bill's musician profile. So Bill, can you give us some insight into the knowledge graph specifically with position zero and voice search?
Well, position zero is often rich answers, right? So stuff taken exactly from your page. I don't actually know how much that process is actually tied in with the knowledge graph, but I think even if it's not tied in, it seems to be sometimes a swap between a rich answer that's taken just out of a page and information that they have. So the example that I gave earlier of Bill Clinton plays a saxophone, right? If you actually type in what instrument does Bill Clinton play, you get a whole knowledge card in position zero on the saxophone. So I think there's more opportunity for Google to get that right and to make a really valuable position zero. And I think it's a really good opportunity for marketers to try to get that position zero, by optimizing for the knowledge graph or optimizing for rich answers and so on.
Yeah, okay.
I think it should be in our target to do that as SEOs.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, I would say, in addition to that, is using the knowledge graph to make sure that what's being communicated about us when we come up in position zero, be we a musician or a company or whatever, is accurate and represents what it is we want to say.
Since that's the, sorry to cut you off.
No,
but
no,
since that's the thing that that little delay always gets you. But that's the thing that voice search, I think, is really big on, right? It's getting that rich answer, right? So you got to make sure. To me, optimization isn't just about making people click the little blue links. It's about making sure that your message is passed through, even when you're using voice search. When you're using, we have a Google Home here, and my wife's always asking you questions. So part of what an SEO needs to do is make sure those answers are right. And you'll get a little tag at the end of the answer. Sometimes it'll say, this response came from WebMD or something, but that's still part of what we're doing now as SEOs. I just think we need to be able to think more than just getting the clicks. It's just Google has changed, and we have to change with it because it's not going to go back.
Oh, okay, brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Paul. Have you got a comment about position zero? Anything that the knowledge graph brings to the table that can be useful to us as marketers?
I think one thing that's interesting with the new Pixel and the new Assistant is routines, and the way that Google has got prescriptive with the way that it's working people through particular workflows. With one particular, I mean, this is more voice command, but I think it relates to, voice searching so much. The fact from an SEO perspective is be very prescriptive with the intent, and then how you work people through the search. And the better we are at doing that, the better answers we'll get, and the better, information we'll be able to provide to the user, and better brand experiences overall.
Brilliant. Yeah, and when you say prescriptive and pulling people through a process, I can't help but go back to the money making slide earlier on. That's how they're going to make money, is to pull you, or how we can make money rather, pull you in at the beginning of the process, and make sure we accompany you from the moment you've asked the first question, informational question about what you can potentially sell them, right through to when you actually sell it to them, and not losing them on the way.
Exactly. And I read something the other day, the whole idea, the holy grail really is to be invisible. People aren't supposed to know that you're there with the knowledge graph. These answers can be given and can help people, and also give them what they require without you being in the way. And I think that would be a rather nice endpoint, with the knowledge graph.
Brilliant. That's a great way to end your contributions to that particular part. Kristine, you've got the last pitch at this, the position zero profile. What can the knowledge graph bring to the table in terms of position zero for us as marketers?
Since right now position zero is kind of a blend of different kinds of content that's pulled either directly from pages or schema or a variety of things, I think the knowledge graph can help make it a bit more accurate because of the entity database and the relations of entities known and between them, the relationships between them. Whereas sometimes the knowledge graph can pull up a completely wrong result just because it's just trying to pull the HTML from a page. And so it can get it very wrong, or it can get it very politically incorrect, or it can get it, as we know, some of the results that had come up around certain historical topics in the knowledge graph. So or in the position one, so a zero. So I think the knowledge graph can help maybe make it a little bit more reliable as it gets better and more sophisticated and more able to understand the factual nature of its data.
Yeah. We bring that as well. That mixes into what Paul was saying, and in fact what Bill was saying, and now I'm going to add something onto that because it's my show, so I'm allowed to. I really like. I use William Shatner as an example a lot because he's done music, books, films, TV, God knows what else. And when you search his name, you can actually dig down and you get the sub searches about his books, about his music, about his films, about Star Trek in particular. And I really like the idea that with companies, we're going to end up with that idea, is that if we communicate enough, ourselves, our entities, our sub-entities, what it is we do, what it is we offer, we can end up with these digging down searches, which Paul was talking about with the path, which can enrich the position zero, can enrich information about us. I don't know what all that means, but just occurred to me. And I'm kind of keen on that idea. So we've had that one. That was absolutely brilliant. We've come to the end of the chat, and I'd like to thank Bill, Kristine, and Paul. That was really, 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 really cool. I got a lot out of it. We've got some questions from the audience, which I'm terribly pleased about. Arnout has asked, in what respect do citations matter to earn the knowledge graph for an entity, and any tips on which sources help those citations? Bill, you did a good job on your own. So outside music, which is easy because you've got Music Brains and Deezer and all that kind of thing, which can corroborate what we're saying. For a business, it's obviously harder. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the knowledge graph is once they have information, they have to validate it. They have to find other sources. Remember when I said that they did not accept my change because somewhere there's some other sources that have conflicting information. So getting those citations, I think, is really important. And Wikipedia is a big one. I know they're using their own properties. God, and I'm sure they're using things that they're not even telling us. So I don't really go at it like, let me make sure I'm hitting, this list. I try to go at it like, make sure every big area where I have an opportunity to make sure the information is accurate. Let me do that, because I don't know where Google's pulling information that's unstructured. But the Wikipedias are where I mean, I know they're taking things out of Google Maps. I know they've said that. I'm going to stop rambling because I don't have a good list. I just think about everything, try to be holistic and try to make sure that everything you want is out there at all the places that, Google is crawling. I know there's some that are more important than others, but I can't say what they are.
Yeah, I actually caught you out with that question because that's actually a question we're going to really look into next week. We've got a whole episode on that. I'm talking to Andrea Volpini from WordLift, who suggests that 20 to 30 corroborations is about what it takes to actually get a piece of information in the knowledge graph or corrected. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but it's nice to have a number on it, and you can say, "Okay, I've got my 20," and we get there. Another question is, does anyone have any idea how often people are using the feedback button? I mean, William Rock's asking, does anyone actually use it? I never have.
I used it last week.
Yeah.
Oh, right. In the medical sphere, I'll be bound.
No, it was actually it was a different client, and I think it had something to do with software, and it was just that they'd been, to get the verified knowledge graph so they could go through and sort their social profiles and be able to do certain tinkering, themselves.
Sure. Okay.
The only time now. Yes.
Has anyone else actually used the feedback button? Kristine or Bill?
I mean, I mentioned that I used it earlier to fix a couple things for myself, but no, I've never needed to do it yet for a client. But I think it's a great, feature that they rolled out to allow people to go in and make some changes. As long as they're pretty good at validating what the changes are and putting the right answers up.
Good point. Yeah. I mean, Paul was talking about control of your own knowledge graph data. I mean, that's a level of control. I mean, sorry, this was in an email Paul wrote me. He was talking about to what extent can we hope to have control of our knowledge graph data? That's one way, or semi-control. Do you think it's useful, or do you think it's just for show to make Google look good?
Well, everything's about making Google look good. But I think it's useful. It's definitely useful. It's a step in the right direction.
Great stuff. Okay, another question is, do you see the knowledge graph, how do you see the knowledge graph being able to help small businesses? I mean, I was doing a French webinar, the same webinar as this, but in French this morning, and that question came up too. So it's obviously a big, important question for people. Small businesses will tend to have more trouble getting into the knowledge graph or being recognized as an entity by Google and be able to push their attributes towards Google by the simple fact that they're not mentioned as much. They don't have as much presence on the web in reliable sources such as Wikipedia. You can't have your Wikipedia if you're a smallish business, if you haven't changed, if you change your industry, or you're not notable in some way. Is there any way small businesses can actually take advantage of the knowledge graph to leapfrog over the big businesses? Who'd like to take that question?
Well, I can.
Sorry, go on.
I hate when I cut people off. Sorry about that. What you just said, I think is so spot on. I think it's unfair, right? There you go. But it's again to my point that I think Google's doing a poor job of taking the information that they know and presenting it, right? Exactly right. You're a smaller business. You don't have a whole lot of citations out there. You don't have a whole lot of references. You don't got the big brand marketing budget that brands have to really create some buzz and create some noise and get noticed by Google. So I want to hear the answers. definitely, Paul, I want to hear your answer, but I think it's a frustration. I think it's a really good example of where the knowledge graph is, or at least the way that Google's implementing it is failing.
Okay, yeah, Paul, what were you going to say? Sorry, not just okay. That was actually really nice comment, Paul.
Similarly, it feels like it's almost directly correlated to brand. You know, as big as your brand is, as big as your knowledge graph deserves to be. You know, and that's what it almost feels like. You know, if you can build your brand, then you will see, in theory, a larger knowledge graph. But that's where smaller businesses are always going to struggle. You know, that it almost feels like a handicapping system for smaller businesses in that regard.
Yeah, which has often been a criticism of Google, is handicapping smaller businesses. Mm-hmm. A lot of smaller businesses complain about that, so that doesn't really look like it's going to be changed very much. But you were saying earlier on that the bigger brands have got so much to optimize, so much to push into there, that perhaps they don't have the time to do it. And perhaps one advantage a smaller business can have is say, well, I've got less to communicate. If I do it efficiently, leveraging my database into schema markup and actually paying somebody to go out there and do my naps, get all that information exactly the same everywhere. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's an opportunity simply because I have less to communicate.
I think that's a very valid point, because you do see it within, especially what I've seen within healthcare. You'll see doctors who have their own marketing budgets, who are running rings around some, you know, the actual, you know, knowledge graph placements that maybe the hospitals should have, but they're actually putting all that work in, like you say, and they're reaping the benefits because of it. You know. Yeah,
I mean, and Kristine, have you got any points to add to that?
No, I think you guys covered it pretty well. So it's always a struggle for small businesses to find their way in especially when things rely on you know, strength of site placement and links and all those kind of things. So yeah, so I think if you're, you know, it depends on what your brand and your vertical is on how well how successful you'll be in getting into that position. So
yeah, some verticals going to be easier. We'll end with one quick question, which is actually my question. So if anyone's got any questions in the audience, please do put them through. We've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask one. In terms of verticals, which are the verticals that are going to be the easiest and which are going to be the most difficult to get in there? Bill, give me some verticals you feel are going to be tough, and which ones are going to be difficult.
Can I pass? That's a really tough question. I mean, that's
Paul actually suggested the question, so now Paul has to answer it.
Yeah, let's hear it, Paul.
That serves me right, doesn't it? I'll be glib and say travel. You know, travel's got to be slightly tricky as we move forwards. But I think I'd say that, you know, on the one hand, healthcare could be extremely difficult, but there are opportunities. You know, there are. You know, so I think that's a double-edged sword there. So there you go. There's one that has a double-edged sword. Thank you.
Now, in terms of verticals, I mean, the thing about it, from my point of view, is I see, once again, this musician movies, William Schachinger example, is we've got everything that's in media, films, books, TV, music, albums. Anybody who's in that area or who has participated in that area is going to have a much easier time actually getting the knowledge graph's attention. Which is what Bill did with his musician thing, and that's what I did. I did cartoons too, and I managed to get a pretty good presence in the knowledge graph by leveraging that, both the cartoons which I did for TV and the music that I did when I made some albums. So all of that media stuff, because of IMDb, Music Brains, and so on and so forth, and fan sites and so on and so forth, becomes very easy. And beyond that, I've found it very difficult to find any verticals where it's actually reasonably easy. Education, perhaps, thinking about it. So there you go. That's my thoughts on that question. I've answered my own question a little bit. That's it from me. And in fact, that takes us very nicely into the next episode, which is going to be next week at the same time, i.e. 3 p.m. CET, 2 p.m. GMT or UK time. And that's about how to get entities and their attributes in the knowledge graph. And we'll probably extend that onto how to correct information on the knowledge graph without having to click on that feedback button. So I'll see you next week with Sam Underwood, Andrew Optimise, and David Amerland for that episode. And for this episode, just want to say a really big thank you to all three of you. I surprised you with a couple of the questions, and I do apologize for that. That was me being a bit cheeky. So Bill, Kristine, Paul, you've been absolutely wonderful, and I thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.